Have you with us today. Today we have Professor Ilan Pappe. Professor Ilan Pappe is the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter and a senior fellow at the University of Exeter's Institute for Arab and Islamic Studies. He is also the chair of the board of the charity, the Nakba Memorial Foundation. Ilan Pappe was born in Haifa in 1954. He received his Dr. Phil from the University of Oxford in 1984. From 1984 to 2006, Pape taught at the University of Haifa and moved to the UK in 2007 to the University of Exeter, UK. Pape wrote 26 books to date, among them The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine in 2007 and On Palestine jointly with Noam Chomsky in 2010. His most recent books are The 10 Myths of Israel in 2018, The Biggest Prison on Earth, A History of the Israeli Occupation in 2019, A Historical Dictionary of Palestine with Johnny Mansour in 2021, and Our Vision for Liberation with Ramzy Baroud in 2022. His latest books are Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic in 2024, A Very Short History of the Arab-Israeli Conflict and Israel on the Brink. Welcome, Professor Ilan Pappe. Thank you so much for being with us today. It is an absolute honor to have you join us. We are very excited to hear from you and to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's a great, great pleasure to be with you and everyone who's listening and watching us.
Thank you again. So I want to dive in on your work on the Nakba. You've emphasized the importance of archives. What did you find in those documents that contradicted the dominant Israeli story? And do you think Israeli society knows the truth about the Nakba and denies it, or is it still a matter of ignorance?
Yes. Well, first of all, what I found in the late 1980s and early 1990s was a very clear, very clear evidence for the planning that was done by the Zionist leadership before the end of the British Mandate, planning for the massive expulsion of the Palestinians, for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, that I could see in the documents that this was an intentional, systematic project of uprooting the Palestinians through the means of war and operations on the ground. I also could see from the document that this was planned many years before the Nakba, and that was therefore really debunking the Israeli myth that even some liberal Zionists subscribe to, that actually people in Palestine became refugees because there was a war on the 15th of May between Israel and the Arab world. But actually what the documents show, that the planning of the expulsion, of the ethnic cleansing, was long before the end of the mandate, long before it was clear what would be the future. And therefore, actually, it was not that the refugees became refugees because of the war. The war was the major means in order to complete the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, which began before Israel was engaged with a war with some Arab armies on the 15th of May, 1948. So the documents show very clearly planning for an ethnic cleansing. It shows very clearly the implementation of the ethnic cleansing, the orders given to the troops, reports on massacres, on other atrocities, and from the very high level of the military command to the behavior of the troops on the ground.
And at what stage in the development of the Zionist movement do we first see the idea of Palestinian expulsion taking shape?
As you probably know, we nowadays, and we have been doing it for quite a while, we define Zionism as a settler colonial movement. There's movement of Europeans, usually outcasts from Europe, people who were themselves refugees from Europe, who come and settle in someone else's homeland and believe, first of all, that that homeland belongs to them, and secondly, that the main obstacle for building a Europe instead of the Europe that didn't want them is the only way of doing it is by eliminating the native population. This happened in the United States and Canada and elsewhere as well. So I would say from the very beginning that the early ideologues of what we call the Zionist movement, let's say the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the moment they believe, for whatever reasons, and if you want, we can delve into the reasons, but whatever they believe, that Palestine, the Arab land, that at that time is part of the Ottoman Empire, the moment they believe this would be the place where they would build a Jewish state instead of Palestine, from that moment onwards, they themselves are convinced that since they knew that the country was not an empty one, they would have to, from their perspective, to de-Arabize the country, or if you want, to uproot the people. Now, until I would say the 1930s, they didn't have the power to do that. So all they could do was to contemplate it, to talk about it, to write about it, to think about it. It transformed from a very fluid idea into a proper kind of strategy, I think, in the late 1930s. Why did it happen in the late 1930s? Because, first of all, there was the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe, so the number of Jews seeking a place to go to outside of Nazi Europe increased, and since the United States and Britain were not very forthcoming in receiving these Jews, some of them opted for Palestine out of no choice. And secondly, by the late 1930s, the military and economic capacity of the settler community was already at such a level that they could feel confident enough that they are now being able to translate the idea of making Palestine a Jewish state from a vision into reality. I owe you an answer to the second part of your first question, so let me do it quickly, whether people know about it in Israel or deny it.
Yeah.
My feeling, yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. I think most of the Israeli Jews do not know much about what happened in 1948. My greatest fear is that when I and others were able at least to, how shall I say it, educate some of them of what happened, it was even worse than not knowing, there was not caring. So I'm not sure what is worse, ignorance or indifference. Both of them are unacceptable, of course. So what I'm trying to say, and you know, this is unfortunately true about the genocide in Gaza. It's true, a lot of it is ignorance, but even when they know, because of the dehumanization of the Palestinians, knowledge does not produce compassion, does not produce better historical understanding, does not, unfortunately, create the conducive circumstances for proper reconciliation and for a better future for everyone who lives between the river and the sea.
And focusing on the Zionist aspect, so we see how influential Christian evangelical Zionists are over America's pro-Israel policies, and some may forget that the majority of Zionists in the world are Christians. Could you describe how Zionism first started as a Christian evangelical project and what it turned into and what it is now?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I don't know how many people know that actually Zionism, namely the idea that the Jews are entitled to a state of their own in Palestine, was originally a Christian evangelical idea, even before it was a Jewish idea or European Jewish ideology. So it started very early on. I would say in the early 19th century, you had quite a lot of powerful people, both in the United States and in Britain, but also in some other parts of the European continent, who really believed in a certain religious dogma, a divine scheme, in which a part of that divine scheme was the Jews returning, so-called returning, to, as they would put it, to the Holy Land, and that their return precipitates or triggers a chain of events that would eventually lead to the resurrection of the dead, the second coming of Jesus, and eventually the end of time in a positive way. So there was a discussion among evangelical Christians: do we wait for the Jews to go without our prodding that? Namely, that would be sign that God has sent them to return, and therefore the divine scheme has begun. And that didn't happen, so they decided to pressure the Jews to go to Palestine so that the program would begin. So yes, early on, Christian Zionists, as they should be called, were pushing for turning Palestine, which was, as we know, an Arab country, part of the Arab world, part of the Muslim world, into a Jewish European state. This was an evangelical Christian idea, not every evangelical Christian church and denomination, but quite a few of them, which had, as I say, very powerful representations in the political and economic elite of the West. And they really found among the Jews who were desperate about the fact that they cannot fight anti-Semitism in Europe, especially Central and Eastern Europe, they found in them allies for this idea for a different reason. And all they needed was an empire that was able to turn this idea into reality. And this is when Britain came into play during the First World War. Now, as we know, Christian Zionism has not disappeared. It remained a very important member of what I would call the Global Israel Alliance, namely those states, institutions, corporation, communities that even in 2025 provide immunity, I should probably say even impunity, to Israel, despite of everything we know that Israel is doing, even in the last 2 years when the genocide is televised for everyone to see for themselves. That is still a very important factor in that global alliance that provides a shield that protects Israel from proper pressure from the outside, and also provides material assistance to the state to continue its policies. So it's a very, it began very many years ago, but it's still here with us. And today, I would venture, I haven't analyzed it empirically, but I would venture to say there are more Christian Zionists in the world than Jewish Zionists.
Yes. And when it comes to the term and the use of Judea and Samaria, we're hearing that so much right now. We're seeing the West Bank being called and transformed into Judea and Samaria. How does the use of the term Judea and Samaria tie into the larger settler colonial project of legitimizing land claims and erasing Palestinian presence?
Yeah, that's very interesting. The early Israeli governments, I would say until 1977, were dominated by the Israeli Labor Party. And the Israeli Labor Party did not use very often the term Judea and Samaria. They used the term West Bank. And although they regarded very much like the right wing in Israel, this part of historical Palestine as a part that has to be under Israeli control, they did not insist always of having direct rule on it. So they were looking for some sort of a compromise between the wish to be still accepted as a peaceful country in the eyes of the West, not incorporating Palestinians so that the demographic balance does not change, that is, incorporating Palestinians who live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as Israeli citizens, and keep the control as much as possible from the outside and where is necessary from the inside. Israeli politics changed dramatically in 1977 when the Likud, the right wing, came into power and stayed there until today. which in many ways is inevitable in projects like settler colonialism. You cannot be a liberal settler colonial. It doesn't really work. It could work for a while, as we can see in Israel, but then it is such an oxymoron that it collapses, and it's not surprising. So the moment the right, what we call in Israel the right wing, took power in 1977, they dispensed with the idea that Israel can play with ruling part of the West Bank indirectly and part of the West Bank directly and so on, and were very much insistent on a direct rule and a very clear ideological claim for the West Bank. And therefore they, by Israeli law, they insisted that the Israelis, whether in the radio, in television, or in their official communication, would use the term Judea and Samaria. The ideological idea is that since you can find the term Judea and you can find the term Samaria in the Old Testament, from their perspective, it means that this is a firm proof that they have the right for the West Bank because it appears in the Old Testament, which of course is ridiculous and doesn't stand any logical test examination. But I'm trying to explain their way of looking at it, of course, and it went very well with the Christian Zionists, as we mentioned before, because they believe very much also in the Old Testament, not just the new one.
Wow. So that's very interesting. I actually did not know that that was the reasoning behind that. But I want to ask just maybe one or two more questions before I open the panel. And I think this is something that's so important that we've seen. We have seen Israelis chant death to Arabs during the yearly flag march and other racist remarks towards Christians as well. How would you describe the racism in Israel and the indoctrination of the Israeli society to view others, especially the Palestinians?
Israel is the Jews in Israel, the Israeli Jewish society is very racist to the core. And there are two, as in other racist societies, there are two forms of racism that people who are at the receiving end of racism have to deal with. In some countries in the West, you have racism which is deeply ingrained and implanted in the society. And yet, at least the official political system, the ethos of the country, the educational system, definitely the academia and the journalists, are trying to fight racism and not allow racism in any official way, which doesn't uproot racism in the society because it is such a vile human behavior that unfortunately appeals to a lot of people. But at least officially, the state is not racist, although sections of the society can be very racist. United States, Britain, you name it. A different level of racism. So this kind of racism exists in Israel. The difference between Israel and many countries in the world and in the West is that also the state is racist. It is racist through its laws, through the messages that it sends in the educational system, through its media, through its political discourse. So not only is racism that almost is inevitable, unfortunately, in so many parts of any society, not only that they're not fighting, they're actually approving it, enhancing it, and increasing it. So death to the Arabs is, yes, something that a person would chant in the street and maybe write as a graffiti on the wall. But if you follow what the Israeli leaders have been saying in the last 2 years about Gaza, it is death to the Arabs. It's the same thing. So you have it, you have it in the official discourse and you have it in the street level discourse, if you want, So that's why I think racism in this case is far more encompassing, far more prevailing, far more difficult to uproot compared to some other countries in the world that at least officially are trying to fight racism.
Yes, and we'll get into what's happening in Gaza as well and speak on that. Um, but I wanted to ask you, what hope do you have for the upcoming future, for the Palestinians, and what does that hope look like?
Yeah. Well, I would be very honest. I wish I could have a hope, I could express hope for the very near future, the next year, two, or so on. I'm part of an international solidarity movement, like you yourself and many others. I'm an activist, and I know we are doing all we can to stop the genocide, hopefully to prevent the next stages in that kind of policy that might be directed, or maybe is already directed, to be honest, towards the people in the West Bank. But I think it's very difficult to hope beyond the fact that I hope we can at least tame the Israelis, because somehow the cumulative effect of the solidarity movement begins to impact the political elites of the West. Not enough, and so far only in words and not in deeds. But I do hope that this would be happening, but it's not enough to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people on the ground in general and in Gaza in particular. I'm an historian, so, and I do believe that there is hope beyond that, which is always very difficult to convey to people who need hope for tomorrow and not the day after. But I have to be honest about tomorrow. I wish I could be more hopeful about that. But I do believe that we are, as I said in many interviews, we are at the end of a bad period in the history of modern Palestine, not at the beginning of a bad period. And that bad period began with the Nakba in 1948. But I think that I can see already, and I'm saying this not as an activist, I say it as an analyst, I can see processes on the ground inside historical Palestine, in the region, and in the world, that in the long term, and I'm afraid I can only say it in the long term, are really going to create a very different reality in the future, a reality which make it much easier to think in a more realistic way about liberation, freedom, decolonization, end of apartheid, and so on. These processes are taking place as we speak, but they are just beginning, and they have to also to meet together to be very transformative. But in my last book that just came out this month, Israel on the Brink, I identify all these processes, and I try to show that they are very close to be fused together into something far more dramatic that would change the reality on the ground. History teaches us that rogue regimes, evil regimes, regimes that exercise criminal or implement on a daily basis criminal policies, systematic violations of human rights and civil rights for so many years do not survive forever. Do not survive forever. You have to have some modicum of belief in humanity that this kinds of inhumanity would not go forever. And I really can see the beginning of these processes that would create this different future. I wish I could say this is for the next few years. I have to be honest. I don't see the balance of power shifting dramatically so quickly. In fact, as an activist, I believe our role is to find a gap, to find how to narrow the gap between the very slow change which is happening in favor of Palestine in the region and in the world, with a very quick pace of destruction that is happening on the ground. We need to find a way to accelerate the pace of the solidarity and the change, and de-accelerate the destruction, at least to begin with, before we can really dream about total freedom, liberation, and decolonization.
Yes, and I do agree. I think with what we're witnessing, and I think one of the questions that somebody may have is about the um, uh, current crisis of Zionism. So I'll let them ask that. But my final
Mhm.
question, in terms of what we're seeing. We're seeing Bibi Netanyahu coming out and speaking about Greater Israel, and we've seen Ben Gvir and they're like, could you describe what Greater Israel is, and if this is something that could be achieved by Israel?
It's definitely they have achieved part of it by being in total control of historical Palestine. Greater Israel is this messianic Zionist fanatic ideology that used to be on the margins of Zionism and now becomes mainstream, which believes that it's possible to recreate the biblical kingdom that they have read about in the Old Testament, in the Bible, which stretched not only over historical Palestine, but also what today is Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and believe that it's possible in the 21st century to do several things. First of all, geographically, to recreate this powerful new Israel definitely over all of historical Palestine. But I do believe that they think about Jordan, at least south of Lebanon and south of Syria as well. Secondly, to run this country as a theocracy, not as a democracy, according to a very strict interpretation of the Jewish halakha, which is the Jewish law. And thirdly, in the process, not only fighting the Palestinians and trying to uproot them, and as we see, not hesitate even to use genocide, but also they deem the secular Jews as the enemy, as people who have played a certain important role, but they can be dispensed with unless they would subscribe to that new ideology. It's a very fanatic, very extreme, racist, colonialist ideology that unfortunately has some powerful supporters, especially in the United States, but not only there, also among Christian Zionists in South America and the north of Europe.
Thank you so much. And I did see some people saying that, in their opinion, they do not see that this will be achieved. So I wanted to, that will complete my questions. So thank you so much. I do want to give a chance for everyone that is listening and our viewers to ask some questions. So again, we have about 30 minutes for everybody listening to have a Q&A session. So if anybody does want to ask, please make sure to request and to keep it respectful. Go ahead, Linda. We will start with you.
Thank you. Hello, Professor. How are you?
Hi, Linda. I'm fine. Thank you. Good to hear you.
Good to meet you. It's an honor, really. I am a big fan of your work. You have educated so many of us over the years, so I truly thank you from the bottom of my heart. My question is in relation to the current situation in Gaza. You've extensively written about the Nakba and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1948. Excuse me. Given the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, some have drawn parallels between the events of the Nakba and what is happening today. Do you believe there are significant similarities between the forced displacement and violence of 1948 and the situation in Gaza? And if so, how would you frame that comparison in historical terms, please?
Yeah, thank you. A very good question. I think that in a nutshell, the Palestinian reference to the history since the Nakba as a Nakba al-Mustamira, the ongoing Nakba, is very much a fitting a reference to begin the answer to your question, namely what we see Israel is doing, Israel has been doing in Gaza in the last 2 years stems among other reasons from the fact that in the ethnic cleansing in 1948 was incomplete. And in 1948, Israel expelled half of the Palestinian population and took over 78% of historical Palestine. But half of the Palestinian population remained in historical Palestine. And even after Israel occupied the whole of historical Palestine in 1967, still half of the Palestinian population remained until this very day in historical Palestine. and the Zionist impulse to make Palestine a place without Palestinians has not changed. The means have changed. The methods have changed because reality keeps changing. Balances of power keep changing. Israel's capacity to do things or not to do things is changing. So the first thing I would say that there is a direct connection between the ideology that motivated the ethnic cleansing of 1948 and the ideology that motivates the genocide in Gaza now. Obviously, the actions of Israel in Gaza is an escalation compared to the very terrible methods they've already used in the Nakba. But it doesn't compare in that respect, not in terms of the number of people dying, of children and women, not in the methods. Of course, the weapons are much more advanced and therefore much more lethal than they were in 1948. And although it was not a very impressive military effort, but at least there were some Arab armies in 1948 trying to stop some of what the Israelis were trying to do. Gaza is by itself alone, squashed into this ghetto that is now become an extermination camp. And this is another chapter in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, or as Rashid Khalidi calls it, the war on Palestine. But it's definitely the worst part of the worst chapter ever. So I can see the same motivation. I can see the same language accompanying the actions in 48 and the actions now. I can see the same dehumanization of the whole population in order to justify massive killing of citizens. So the difference is in the measure, in the magnitude, but not in the motivation, and unfortunately also not in the way either the region or the international community reacts to this kind of elimination that has been attempted ever since 1948.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for your answer, Professor Ilan Pappe. We'll go to Viking Mom next.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet you, Professor Ilan Pappe. I'm from England, so you mentioned a lot about my country. I was very ashamed. I have two questions, if that's okay with you, Taz, be very quick. So you mentioned about racism coming from what Taz just mentioned. A lot of it came from my country. Yes, I do admit that. It's all coming from everywhere that we are seeing. Oh, yeah, one, that's fine. You made a very good point, because for what I'm seeing right now, yes, there's a lot of racism coming from Israel against the Palestinians, not Arabs, they're Palestinians. I keep talking to them until they are Palestinians. But what I'm seeing now is more of an anti-Semitic areas coming from with Jews against Jews, i.e. Zionists claim themselves as Jews against Orthodox Jews, Mizrahi Jews, all these other types of Jewish people that claim to be Jews, but they're Zionists. So technically, anti-Semitism is happening against their own people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's something in it. I think that Zionism insists on among many other things, insists that its interpretation of Judaism is the exclusive and only right interpretation of Judaism. So if other Jews do not accept the interpretation of Zionism, and even more so, other Jews say, wait a minute, not only we don't agree with your interpretation of what Judaism is because intellectually or theologically we disagree with you, we particularly oppose your interpretation of Judaism because it leads you to do all the terrible things that you are doing. They become enemies of Zionism. Very much like anyone who is not Jewish is an enemy of Zionism. This is why this whole equation that says anti-Zionism is anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is so ridiculous, because so many people who are anti-Zionists are Jews themselves, and a lot of people who are anti-Semites, you're absolutely right, can be Jews themselves. So this is very important, to identify people not according to who they are, but what they believe in and what they do on the basis of what they believe in. And the moment we will use this as the best way of analyzing, I think the Zionists would have very little chance of convincing people that they are subscribing to an ideology that should be respected in the world as democratic or liberal, or one that should really be tolerated. So definitely, the racism towards the Jews who came from Arab countries, of course, is far more complicated issue. I don't know how much time we have to go into it. On the one hand, you're absolutely right. The European Jews who were the first settlers who came to Palestine, and the Jews who came from Arab countries came much later as settlers. The European treated these Arab Jews as Arabs, namely, they displayed racism towards them. Some of that racism is still there in Israel. Unfortunately, some of the most important racist communities inside Israel today are the second and third generation of Jews who came from Arab countries. I don't have time to go and explain why. I'm just stating the fact. And that saddens me very much, because I do believe that a decolonized Palestine that would be reintegrated to the Arab world would make life much better, especially for the Jews who came from Arab countries. But right now, so many of them are following Bibi Netanyahu. So many of them are really are the most important core group of racism towards the Palestinians.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Viking Mom.
No, thank
I
you.
wish we had time to go into that, speaking about, where, a lot of the Arab Jews came and settled, and then you're saying the decolonization. Maybe, hopefully, maybe next time we can elaborate and have a more detailed discussion on that, because I think we always hear that, and a lot of people talk about it, and I think just having that knowledge from you would be amazing. But thank you so
Yeah.
much, Viking Mom.
No,
We'll
thank
go
you.
next to
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much
Hi.
for being here. So my question is, from your perspective as a historian, what forces or contradictions do you think will ultimately bring about the end of Zionism?
Yeah, well, I think that there are several processes. I'm not sure I will remember all of them right now, but let me mention the most important ones that lead me to believe that in the more distant future, there is a de-Zionist, if you want, future for all of us who live between the river and the sea, and those who were expelled from historical Palestine. The first one is the implosion of the Israeli society from within. I already mentioned it, that the Zionist, the Messianic Zionist right wing, as they're called in Israel, that used to be on the margins and are now a very dominant force, do not only subscribe to the most possible racist views towards the Palestinians, but they also cannot tolerate a secular way of life, or if you want, even a liberal way of life of the Israeli Jewish society that subscribes to that mode of life, like in Tel Aviv, for instance. And this came in the last, even before October 2023, this began to tear the Israeli Jewish society from within in a very fundamental way. In such a fundamental way that some of the more secular Jews, who also are a very important part of the Israeli economic elite, have already left in great numbers with their capital before October 23, and many more so after October 23. So that's one process, implosion from within. Secondly, I think the Israeli Great Israel ideology demands a lot of resources. So far, America is providing most of these resources, but I'm not sure America would be able to provide these resources in the future. So I think there's also an economic crisis, which is very important. Thirdly, we know that the civil society, the global civil society, has already isolated Israel in a very significant way. And now we can see the beginning of some governments, mainly in the global south, like Brazil and Colombia. But this will, I think, continue, that would heed the pressure from their societies to further isolate Israel. The fact that so many Jews, especially young Jews, including in the United States, disassociate themselves from Zionism is another important process in this respect. And finally, probably most importantly, people say rightly, we don't expect much of the current Palestinian political system. They are disunited, they are fragmented between Fatah and Hamas, and the PA doesn't represent the Palestinians, and therefore people don't put much trust in the Palestinian ability to liberate Palestine. I don't share this dismal and gloomy analysis. I think that people forget that the Palestinian community is one of the youngest in the world. And when you listen to the younger Palestinian generation, you don't see disunity, you don't see fragmentation. You can see a very assertive community wherever they are, interconnecting despite of the geographical fragmentation and building a very clear vision for the future. I still think that there is a need for organization, for an infrastructure, willingness to play the politics. All this will happen, I believe. And I think that's another process that is very, very important. And maybe I should add, I don't think that what we see today, the politics we see today in the Arab world, is the politics of the future necessarily. And the more the Arab governments would represent faithfully their people, the more influence the Arab world would have on the future of Palestine as well.
Thank you so much, Adana, for your question and excellent answer, Professor Ilan Pappe. Thank you. We will go next to Alon. Alon.
Hello.
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 שלום פרופסור פאפה, קודם כל נעים מאוד להקשיב לך. I have a question to you as an Israeli. Do you think it's possible to free liberal Zionists of their colonial mindset?
Excellent question, Alon. I don't know if you might have read Albert Memmi. Albert Memmi is talking about the leftist colonizer, where he says how much the leftist colonizers, sometimes even genuinely, and that's true about the liberal Zionists, genuinely try not to be a colonialist. As long as they subscribe to the colonialist ideology, it will always take over any other beliefs they have, like universal beliefs, whether it's socialism, liberalism, or human rights. So I agree with you. I think liberal Zionists are settler colonialists, and you cannot be an enlightened colonizer, you cannot be a progressive ethnic cleanser, and you cannot be a socialist, a genocider. Now, will they do the extra mile? I think that's what you're asking. Is it possible to see them? I really believe that this can happen, but not in great numbers. So we cannot make it a precondition for change. I think it's much more an outcome of all the processes that I talked about, but not an important process by itself. So I don't expect a dramatic change within the Israeli Jewish society as being the main, change for the better. I talked about implosion, yes, but not changing policies to such an extent that we can start decolonization. No, I think that they will decolonize themselves when they will begin to see what I believe is going to happen, the dramatic changes in the circumstances of their own life in Israel, whether it's their economic situation, their legal international situation, and so on. Some of them, of course, would leave, which is unfortunately, but you cannot do anything about it. And some of them, I hope, would be willing to build together a different country. I'm always encouraged by a visit I made to South Africa in 2014, when a lot of white people I met told me that, all of them told me, we were against apartheid. We all were against apartheid. And I said, well, if you were all against apartheid, why did it take so long to topple it? It means that people can get used to a different reality, but they would have to be forced to give up their privileges and to allow equality and freedom and liberation to be the guidance in their life. They won't do it voluntarily, the liberal Zionists. And to be honest, I think they are less and less an important factor in Israeli politics. But it's a good question, and I definitely don't give up on dialoguing with them if they're at all willing to dialogue. But yes, I think that it's not going to happen massively. And the most important thing is, of course, and I know you didn't mean it, I'm just saying it just for the record, change in Israeli policy towards the Palestinians is not a precondition for the liberation of Palestine.
Thank you.
Answer. תודה רבה.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alon. Thank you. I don't know if we have critical. Oh, go ahead. Critical. Oh,
Good morning, meatbags. Professor Pappe, I'm a huge fan. So great. It's so strange to just wake up and see you speaking on social media.
Thank you.
What a wonderful future we live in, despite the obvious issues. I had a question for you. I've been planning to ask for years, I guess. In your book, The Idea of Israel, you draw a distinction between Zionism, post-Zionism, and neo-Zionism. I was wondering if you could say a few words about that transition of how we arrived at neo-Zionism. I think it would be interesting for the viewers. But I also have a question about where Zionism as a colonial endeavor, where it will end up in the future if we look at it from the perspective of other colonial entities throughout, excuse me, throughout the last 500 years, because they transitioned from religious movements to military action. But in the present time, those same powers exist within multinational corporations. They still extract and exploit countries. So where does Zionism have a place in the future, considering it's infiltrated these multinational corporations like Palantir and Elon Musk's conglomerates? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. For your first question, well, classical Zionism, so to speak, the labor Zionist movement that established the first colonies in Palestine and led the actions in the Nakba, created the State of Israel, and remained in power until 1977, was trying to reconcile its ideas about socialism and then social democracy, later on even liberal democracy, with the settler colonial project of Zionism. And this didn't work. And this is why the Israeli society itself understood that this kind of juggling or squaring the circle is not working, and opted to be far more on the side of the settler colonial project, without heeding too much attention to the need to be democratic, socialist, or universalist. This left some of the liberal Zionists in a problem, and that's where post-Zionism arrived, when a group of especially Israeli academics, journalists, culture producers were trying to almost to examine how far can they leave behind them Zionist principles in order to make Israel a more open society, a more democratic one. And I think they found out, and I definitely went through this process myself, that you cannot really do it even if you go a bit further in your criticism on Zionism. In other words, you can only be a Zionist or an anti-Zionist. There is no third option. It's a very much like the two-state solution, which tries to say that it's a third option between a Jewish state all over Palestine and the Palestinian liberation. Well, it's a bad compromise, the two-state solution, and therefore also post-Zionism did not work. But it was an important attempt, because some of the people who were involved in that became anti-Zionist activists, and for this we should be thankful. Neo-Zionists therefore became the rule. Israelis were tired in lying to themselves, lying to the world. You needed a strong belief in God, of course, or a messianic kind of ideology to believe that you can that you can disregard international law, disregard an international solidarity movement. And this brings me to your second question, and that I already commented on it in a way. However fanatic and however racist and however dangerous this ideology is, its chances of success depends on a global alliance, which also has some regional allies. Now, there is a global Israel. The global Israel, and you mentioned a very important part of that global Israel, the multinational cooperation. I would add to this the Christian Zionists. I would add to this the neocons. I would add to this the fascist right-wing parties in Europe. And I would add to this, and I would not name them, some Arab rulers who are more rulers than leaders. So there is this coalition that allows Zionism, even Zionism in its present version, to thrive. You ask me about the future. Well, I think it really depends on all of us. If the kind of politics, not only on Palestine, if the kind of politics that this alliance implements, not just in Palestine, towards issues such as global warming, global poverty, towards arms deals, securitization, immigration, life-seeking people, if all that policies are governed by this mixture of neo-right capitalism and conservatism, together with populism and multinational corporations, then not only Palestine is doomed for a very bad future, but also many of us in the globe. But I do believe that we can create a global Palestine, a counter coalition that includes people, indigenous people are fighting for the rights, minorities are fighting for the rights, people who believe in social justice and ecological justice, any even baby step towards challenging the power of neo-capitalism, of conservatism, of populism, every baby step towards successfully taming it, arresting it, creating some better chances for a different kind of reality is a win situation, is a win moment for Palestine. Any failure to do it is a win moment or will extend longer the present reality in Palestine. Maybe it's the optimist in me. I do believe in human beings. I do believe history is cyclic and not linear, which means I do believe there were moments in history where we overcame fascism, we overcame dictatorship, we overcame racism, we overcame colonialism, and I do believe we will be able to do it again. You need to be intersectional, interglobal for that. Palestine alone cannot do it, but Palestine is not alone. It is just making sure that the global Palestine is the future and not what I termed as global Israel.
Thank you, Critical, for that question. All right, we'll go next to our brother Mo Hamza. Wait, why am I saying it? Mo Hamza. So our brother Mo Hamza is a wonderful activist, and he's actually been censored on Meta on Instagram almost like 15 times at this point. We don't know. We're still every single time he makes an account. So welcome, brother. Great to see you with us. If you wanted to ask a question or have any remarks, the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, Professor Pape, thank you so much for your voice. And I just wanted to say it's not just your voice, it's your intellectual voice, your knowledgeable voice, and honestly, your fact-based voice. That is something that Zionists are the most afraid of, are facts and truths. And you come with a very beautiful set of historical knowledge and facts that are irrefutable. And your voice and coming from your perspective has been incredible for our movement. So I just wanted to thank you as a Palestinian myself. So yeah, I'm a Palestinian American. I go by Mo Hamza. So I actually have been censored, I would say, banned from Meta in totality 23 times. And I'm on my 24th account trying to sneak by, trying to put out as much content as I can from my perspective as well. So wanted to, first and foremost, thank you again. My main question is, I know you touched on two-state solution. It's the big money question always. And it's that ridiculous, veiled, fallback for all the Western governments to say, oh, a two-state solution, this two-state solution, that's the only option, right? I do want everyone to hear your perspective on two-state solution. I personally like to call it the two-state illusion, in a way. So a lot of Palestinians that understand that know how to combat the facts around what is the reality there and how we can truly thrive as a Palestinian, nation and have our total sovereignty. So my question is, I guess, what are your thoughts on when someone says, what do you think of the two-state solution?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for your activism as well, of course, and your kind words. I think the two-state solution has been dead for a very long time. And, it lies in the morgue, but nobody does to give it a proper funeral or burial. It is not working for two main reasons. One, it's not practical, given the fact that we have now one apartheid state ruling every square inch of Palestine, not just parts of Palestine, and it rules that part by increasing all the time the number of Jewish settlers in it. So any conversation of a Bantustan has to take a Palestinian Bantustan. Any such conversation has to be linked to the map, and people should ask themselves where exactly would be that Palestinian state if you want to retain the Zionist state as a legitimate entity. That's the practicality of it. The morality of it is that it is not. It's a colonialist idea. That because of the anti-colonialist resistance, it seems that the settler colonial state cannot fully control every part of the indigenous land, and therefore it looks for collaborators, and it looks for spaces that it may not need to rule directly. It doesn't deal with the core issue, and the core issue is that we are dealing here with colonization that has to be replaced not by a peace treaty, but by decolonization. It is not moral because it only relates to half of the Palestinian people, not to all of them. It only relates at best to less than 20% of historical Palestine. So for all that reasons, it's almost like doctors who are facing a patient with a serious illness, and all they're thinking is how to solve one of the symptoms of the illness without going to the very core of the illness. So I think it is morally and now even practically not the solution. I also think, and that is, I think you alluded to it, and I think that's very important, the ongoing conversation on a two-state solution really allows especially the Western elite and also some elites, political elites in the global South, to say, we don't expect us to take a fundamental position against Zionism as racism, as indeed some of the global South countries were willing to do in 1975 in the famous United Nations resolution that equated Zionism with racism and apartheid. Don't expect us to do this because the Palestinians themselves only want a small state next to Israel. So don't expect us to, question the legitimacy of the state of Israel, rather than just let us help them to dispense of a small part of Palestine and allow some sort of a Palestinian Bantustan there. This is very convenient because especially for European political elites, they are the ones who conceived in the past this idea that because they cannot deal with anti-Semitism, instead of making Jews welcome in Europe after the Second World War and the Holocaust, they said, oh, it's much better to have a Jewish state at the expense of the Palestinians, and therefore we don't need really to deal to have the Jews in Europe itself. They are complicit in this very immoral, and I think time would prove also impractical idea of imposing a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world, at the heart of the Muslim world, against the wishes of the Palestinians. The two-state solution tries still to do this imposition under the guise of a peace process with the right discourse and so on. It hasn't been working for 50 years. It is not going to work in the future. The only solution is decolonizing the whole of Palestine, of liberating all the Palestinians, including those who are in the have been refugees and expelled from Palestine, and building a free state for everyone from the river to the sea, and reconnect it to its natural and organic place in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Mashrek, hopefully also contributing to solutions that are actually needed as well in places such as Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon.
Perfect. Yeah, that's music to many people's ears, and as I know, I love that answer from you always. It's something that I think everyone needs to hear, especially from your perspective. And what we are seeing nowadays is so blatant in terms of like even the polls that are coming out of Israel are so telling on what the majority thinks. So it is very systemic in nature what the majority of Zionists feel. So when you see, for example, Israelis protesting, I want to be very clear. So for the most part, there are some Israelis that have the right intention with the way they're protesting, right? So, but there are some that are not necessarily doing it for the sake of Palestinians in any way, shape, or form. I want to maybe be very clear there, because many can actually technically go march across Gaza without being stopped, in my opinion. And they're just essentially marching in Tel Aviv. Those are the types of the things I notice on my end. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that as the Zionist nature within Israel is very, in terms of how they view Gaza, how they view Palestinians as a subhuman class in a way, is very systemic in nature. And that is a very strong reason as to why a two-state solution also is not possible, in my opinion, because of everything you just alluded to. But I again, for the sake of how Palestinians are viewed in a systemic nature within Israel, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that perspective from a Palestinian point of view.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are a few thousand Israeli Jews who are demonstrating against the genocide, not for the swap of prisoners or against Netanyahu, and they are immediately dispersed by the police. It's illegal in Israel to demonstrate purely against the genocide. I really salute those thousands, because whenever they demonstrate, they will find themselves in the police station and sometimes in jail. Yeah, that's a very fair assessment. Anyway.
Thank you, Mo. I appreciate that. I know we're right at the. I know I know we have Taz and Sidan that wanted to ask a question, and I know we just made it right at the 1 hour mark. I know Sidan just wanted to say hello. She's a big fan, so if you just wanted to say hi, Sidan, real quick. But we are unfortunately, and Taz, another sister, Taz, also wanted to ask a question, and we weren't able to. But real quick, Sidan, if you just want to say hello, and then we'll wrap it.
Hi, Professor Ilan Pappe. I'm a huge fan of your work. You've been a huge inspiration to all of us. I always recommend your book to everyone that wants to learn more about Israel and Palestine. You have been a huge inspiration, and you have been such a driving force when it comes to educating people on the distinction between Zionism and Judaism. I genuinely appreciate you. I had a quick question about...
I don't know if we'll be able to have a question though.
Let's do a quick one, and I'll do
Yes.
it quick, and then I would leave you and say goodbye with my hand.
Okay.
So you know that
Do you think
Okay.
that there will be a Western, a shift on the Western perspective, specifically in academia, when it comes to Israel and Palestine?
Well, academia is changing. We have now 8 centers for Palestine studies in Western academia, which we never had before. I'm checking curriculum, I'm checking modules and courses. I can see a shift. It's not enough. It's not enough. Yes, I do believe this is one of sections of society that would eventually contribute to a different conversation and language about Palestine among journalists, among politicians. But you know, all of us who are academics have a lot of work to do. We are not onlookers. It won't happen by us watching it. It will happen by us, especially those of us who have tenure, those of us who have secure positions in academia have to do much more to make sure that the academia does its role for the sake of justice in Palestine. And with this, I would end by saying, as you all understand, I think, and you know, justice for Palestine is not just for Palestine. And any struggle against social and economic and political injustice, wherever you are, is very much the struggle against the injustice in Palestine. And any success in those struggles is a success in the struggle for justice in Palestine. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. Thank you so much, Professor Ilan Pappe, for joining us today. We'll try to have you again, and thank you again for being
I
with
will
us. It
do
was an
my best.
honor.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thank you,
much.
everyone. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.
وانت جد الأحرار جد الفلسطينية